Before we dive into today's story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Here we reveal the untold side of fame. Muhammad Ali, the day I defied the whole world. The morning air in Miami felt thick against my skin as I stepped out of the car, cameras already flashing like lightning in a summer storm. It was April 28th, 1967, and I could feel the weight of the entire world pressing down on my shoulders. The reporters pushed forward like hungry wolves, their microphones stretched toward me like weapons, their voices a cacophony of accusations and questions I'd heard 1,000 times before. Ali, will you step forward today? Are you really going to refuse induction? What do you say to those calling you a traitor? I kept my head high, my jaw set firm. My mama always told me to stand tall, no matter what storm was coming. But even she couldn't have prepared me for this hurricane. The United States Army Induction Center in Houston loomed before me like a courthouse where my fate would be decided. Every step it took toward those doors felt like walking through quicksand, each footfall heavier than the last. I ain't got no quarrel with them vet song I had said months before, and those words had followed me like shadows ever since. The reporters, the government officials, the fans who once cheered my name, they all wanted to know if I'd really go through with it. If I'd really refused to step forward when they called Cassius Clay, a name I'd left behind like old clothes that no longer fit. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. The walls were painted that institutional green that seemed to suck the life out of everything it touched. Other young men sat in plastic chairs, some nervous, some resigned, all of us caught in the machinery of a war one of us had asked for. But I was different. The cameras followed me, the officials watched my every move, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear the voice of my teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, reminding me of my faith, my principles, my duty to something higher than earthly governments. Mr. Clay, the officer called out, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. I didn't move. My real name was Muhammad Ali, and I made that clear more times than I could count. The silence stretched between us like a tight rope. Everyone in that room knew what was happening. This wasn't just about one man refusing military service. This was about everything: race, religion, war, freedom, and the right to live by your conscience even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding like a heavyweight's fist against a heavy bag. 3 years earlier, I had shocked the world by beating Sonny Liston, a man so fearsome that grown men crossed the street to avoid him. I was 22 years old then, young and hungry, dancing around there like I was floating on air. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, I had said, and the whole world had laughed with me, not at me. But everything changed after that night in Miami Beach when I announced I had found my true religion, my true name, my true purpose. The laughter turned to booze. The cheers turned to death threats. Letters poured in calling me everything but a child of God. Boxing commissions started looking for reasons to strip me of my titles. Reporters who once praised my quick wit now questioned my sanity. I remember sitting in my hotel room the night after I first announced my conversion to Islam, staring out at the neon lights of Miami, wondering what I had done. The phone rang constantly, reporters, promoters, family members, all asking the same question. Are you sure about this, Cassius? My name is Muhammad Ali. I said into the phone for the 100th time that night. Muhammad means one who is worthy of praise, and Ali means most high. That's who I am now. But knowing who you are and living as who you are in a world that wants you to be someone else, that's two different fights entirely. And this morning in Houston, I was about to face the biggest fight of my life, and it wouldn't be in any ring. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. Other inductees were processed, their names called, their feet shuffling forward when commanded. Some looked relieved, others terrified, but they all moved when told to move. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, trying to find peace in prayer while chaos swirled around me. You know what's going to happen if you don't step forward? My lawyer had warned me just days before. They'll arrest you immediately. You'll lose your boxing license. You could go to prison for 5 years. Your career will be over. Everything you've worked for will be gone. I had looked him straight in the eye and said, "Some things are worth more than money and fame." But sitting there in that government building, with the weight of consequence pressing down on me like a mountain, I wondered if I truly understood what I was giving up. Boxing wasn't just my career, it was my gift, my art, my way of expressing the fire that burned inside me. In the ring, I was poetry in motion, a master of sweet science, a warrior who turned fighting into dancing and violence into beauty. 3 years earlier, when I was still Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky, I had dreams as big as the sky. I wanted to be the greatest boxer who ever lived, to make enough money to buy my mama a house, to show the world that a young black man from the South could rise above everything that was meant to keep him down. And I was doing it. I was undefeated, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the most famous athlete on the planet. Now, all of that was about to disappear because I wouldn't compromise my soul. The officer called out again, "Cassius Clay." His voice was sharper now, irritated. Still, I didn't move. Around me, I could feel the tension rising like heat from summer pavement. The other men in the room shifted uncomfortably. The officials whispered among themselves. Someone cleared their throat. A chair squeaked against the linoleum floor. I closed my eyes and thought about my grandmother, who used to tell me stories about her ancestors, about people who faced impossible choices and somehow found the strength to choose right over easy. It hot about Jackie Robinson, who endured hatred and threats to break baseball's color barrier. It hot about all the young black men who had looked up to me, who saw in my success a possibility for their own lives. But mostly, I thought about the war raging on the other side of the world, in the jungles of Vietnam, where boys not much younger than me were dying in a conflict I didn't understand for reasons that made no sense to me. The government wanted me to go over there and kill people who had never called me names, never lynched my people, never denied me service in a restaurant. I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong, I had said, and I meant every word. The morning sun streamed through the windows now, casting long shadows across the floor. In a few minutes, they would call my name, my slave name, one final time. And when they did, the whole world would be watching to see what Muhammad Ali, heavyweight champion of the world, would do. Would I step forward and compromise everything I believed in to save my career? Or would I remain seated and watch my world crumble around me? Outside, I could hear protesters chanting, some supporting me, others calling for my arrest. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked like a time bomb, each second bringing me closer to the moment that would define not just my life but my legacy. I opened my eyes and looked around the room one more time. This was it. This was the moment when I would discover what I was truly made of. Not in a boxing ring, where I could dance and jab and slip punches, but here, in this sterile government building, where there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no way to fight back except by standing still. The officer was reaching for his clipboard again. My name was about to be called for the third and final time. After that, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and prepared to face my destiny. The handcuffs felt cold against my wrists. Within minutes of refusing induction, federal agents were reading me my rights while photographers captured every angle. The irony hit me immediately. The hands that had just refused to hold a rifle were now bound behind my back. Outside the induction center, chaos erupted. Protesters surged forward as news spread that I'd actually done it. The heavyweight champion of the world had chosen principle over prize. Ali, Ali. Some screamed in support. Traitor, draft dodger. Others roared back. Police sirens wailed. Officers on horseback tried to control the crowd. Reporters shoved microphones toward my face as agents pushed me toward their car. Camera flashes popped like fireworks, capturing the moment America's golden boy became America's most wanted. "Do you have any regrets?" a reporter shouted. I looked straight into the camera. "The only thing I regret is that more people don't have the courage to do what's right instead of what's popular." They slammed the car door shut. As we drove through Houston streets, I watched ordinary people stop to stare. Some pointed, others shook their heads. A few held up fists in solidarity. I was no longer just a boxer. I was a symbol of resistance or cowardice, depending on who you asked. The federal courthouse was another circus. My lawyer met me at the entrance, his face grim. "They're moving fast," he whispered as we walked through the gauntlet. "The boxing commissions are already talking." He was right. 3 days later, I was in my Miami training camp when Angelo Dundee burst through the door with a piece of paper in his shaking hand. "They did it," he said. "They actually did it. The New York State Athletic Commission had stripped me of my title and suspended my boxing license. Within hours, every other state followed suit. Just like that, I was no longer the heavyweight champion of the world." I sat down heavily, staring at that paper. 27 years old, undefeated in 29 professional fights. At the peak of my physical powers. All of it gone with the stroke of a pen. "How long?" I asked Angelo. "Nobody knows. Could be years. Years. I trained my whole life for boxing, lived and breathed it since I was 12 years old. Now that world was closed to me." The hate mail started pouring in within a week. Thousands of letters from Americans who saw my refusal as the ultimate betrayal. "Dear Muhammad Ali," one began, written in careful cursive. "I hope you burn in hell for what you vetoed to our boys in Vietnam. You are a disgrace to your race and your country." Signed, a real American. But for every hate letter, there was another kind. From college students who understood what I was trying to say. From mothers who didn't want their sons shipped to Southeast Asia. From young black men who saw something in my stand that spoke to their own struggles. "Brother Ali," wrote a kid from Detroit, "thank you for showing us that a man can stand up to the whole system and not break. You gave me courage I didn't know I had." I kept both kinds of letters. The hate reminded me what I was fighting against. The support reminded me I was fighting it all. The financial reality hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Within months, my income dropped from millions to almost nothing. No fights, no purses, no endorsements. I had to lay off my training staff, sell cars, move into a smaller house. My wife Belinda never complained, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the silence. For 3 years, I'd been the most famous athlete on earth. Reporters followed my every move. The whole world wanted to know what Muhammad Ali thought about everything. Now, suddenly, nobody cared what I had to say. I'd wake up and for just a moment forget that everything had changed. I'd reach for the phone to call Angelo about training schedules that didn't exist anymore. I'd check the sports pages for fight announcements that would never come. I'd catch myself shadow boxing in front of the mirror, throwing combinations at opponents I might never face again. The worst moments came at night, when my mind started wandering down dark paths. What if I'd been wrong? What if my stand had been for nothing? What if all those people calling me a coward were right? I'd pray then, long into the night, asking Allah for strength and some sign that I'd chosen correctly. Sometimes the answers came. Sometimes they didn't. One evening in July, I was walking through my neighborhood when I heard kids playing in a vacant lot. They were boxing or throwing wild punches and talking trash like they'd seen me do on television. "I'm Muhammad Ali," one skinny kid announced, dancing around. "I'm the greatest." "Ali's a coward," another kid shot back. "My daddy says he's afraid to fight in the war." The first kid stopped dancing. "Ali ain't afraid of nothing. He just don't believe in killing people for no good reason." "That's not what my daddy says." "Well, maybe your daddy's wrong." They started scuffling for real, and I had to step in to separate them. Two kids, maybe 10 years old, fighting about principles they barely understood, dividing along the same lines that had split the whole country. "Listen here," I told them both, kneeling down to their eye level. "Fighting's not about proving who's right. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from a fight that don't need to happen." The skinny kid looked up at me with recognition dawning. "You really are Muhammad Ali, ain't you?" I smiled. "Yeah, little man. I really am. Are you ever going to fight again?" That was the question everyone wanted answered, including me. "I don't know," I told him honestly, "but I am going to keep training like I will. You never know what tomorrow might bring." Walking home that evening, I realized something important. Even if I never set foot in another boxing ring, my refusal to be inducted had started a different kind of fight. A fight for the hearts and minds of a generation that was questioning everything their parents had taught them about duty and patriotism. I was no longer just fighting for championships. I was fighting for the right to live by my conscience in a country that claimed to value individual freedom above all else. It was the hardest fight of my life, and I was losing on every scorecard that mattered to most people. But somewhere deep inside, in that place where a fighter keeps his most essential strength, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. They had taken my title, my income, my platform, but they hadn't taken my voice. And I wasn't about Tosti silent. The first college auditorium I walked into as a speaker instead of a fighter was at Howard University in Washington, D.C., September 1967, 5 months after losing everything. The students packed that hall like it was a championship fight, but their faces told a different story. Some came to support me. Others came to see if Muhammad Ali would crack under pressure when he couldn't punch his way out of trouble. A few came just to boo the man they'd been told was a coward and a traitor. I walked onto that stage wearing a simple black suit instead of boxing trunks, carrying nothing but my voice and my convictions. No gloves, no cornermen, no bell to save me if things went bad. They tell me I'm supposed to be quiet now. I began, my voice carrying to the back rows without a microphone. They tell me that since I can't fight in the ring anymore, I should just disappear and let them forget about Muhammad Ali. The crowd stirred. Some leaned forward. Well, I got news for them. Taking away my boxing license didn't take away my mouth. And as long as it got breath in my body, I'm going to speak truth to power. A student in the front row stood up. What gives you the right to speak for our generation when you won't even fight for your country? The auditorium went dead quiet. This was the moment they'd all come to see. Would I fold under direct confrontation without my fist to back me up? I looked the young man straight in the eye. Son, I'm fighting for my country. I'm fighting for the America that was promised in the Constitution. The one where a man can live by his conscience without being called a traitor. I'm fighting for the America where young black men don't have to go halfway around the world to prove their patriotism when they can't even get served at a lunch counter in their hometown. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others jeered, but nobody was indifferent. That night changed everything for me. I realized that losing my boxing career had given me something even more powerful, a platform to reach minds instead of just bruising bodies. Over the next 3 years, I would speak at over 200 colleges and universities across America, turning auditoriums into arenas and debates into boxing matches where words were my weapons. At Berkeley, I told students the Viet Cong never call me the names I'd heard in America. The ovation lasted 10 minutes. At Yale, a professor tried to trap me with legal arguments about civic duty. I shut him down with simple truth. My religion teaches me that all life is sacred. If that makes me an American, then maybe Americans to take a long look in the mirror. But it wasn't just college kids who started listening. Something bigger was happening in America, and somehow my fight had become part of it. In March 1968, I got a phone call that changed my perspective on everything I've been doing. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asking if I'd speak at an anti-war rally in New York. Muhammad, he said in that powerful, rolling voice of his, you took a stand when it cost you everything. Now it's time for all of us who believe in justice to stand together. I'd met Dr. King before, but this was different. He wasn't talking to me as a celebrity or a curiosity. He was talking to me as an equal in the fight for what was right. 2 weeks later, I stood beside him at a massive rally in Central Park. 50,000 people stretched out before us like a sea of conscience. When Dr. King introduced me, the roar was deafening. 3 years ago, I told that crowd, I was just a fighter trying to win championships. Today, I'm a man trying to win something more important. The right for every American to live by their beliefs without fear. Dr. King nodded from behind me. For the first time since losing my title, I felt like I was exactly where E was supposed to be. But the private cost of being a public symbol was eating me alive. I was traveling 300 days a year, living out of suitcases, staying in different hotels every night. The speaking fees helped pay the bills, but they were nothing compared to what I'd made in the ring. My wife, Belena, was raising our children mostly alone while I crisscrossed the country, being Muhammad Ali, the symbol. Late at night, in anonymous hotel rooms, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder what I'd become. Was I still a boxer? A preacher? A political activist? Sometimes I felt like I'd lost myself in the image everyone else needed me to be. The worst part was watching my body betray the gift God had given me. I was still in my 20s, still in me physical prime, but I could feel the reflexes slowing, the muscle memory fading. Every day out of there was a day I'd never get back. Boxers have such a short window to be great, and mine was closing while I sat on the sidelines. In 1969, I was speaking at a rally in Chicago when a reporter asked me if I ever regretted my decision to refuse induction. Let me tell you something, I said, the microphone picking up every word. I could be sitting in some jungle in Vietnam right now, killing people I never met for reasons I don't understand. Instead, I'm here in America, using my voice to wake people up to injustice right here at home. Which one sounds more patriotic to you? But privately, doubt haunted me. 3 years out of boxing. 3 years of my prime wasted. Legal appeals dragging through the courts with no end in sight. Some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming I was back in the ring, only to remember that the ring was forbidden to me. My lawyer kept filing appeals, but the boxing commissions wouldn't budge. The government wanted to make an example out of me. They wanted every young man in America to see what happened to Muhammad Ali and think twice before following their conscience over their draft notice. What they didn't understand was that the longer they kept me silenced as a boxer, the louder my voice became as a symbol of resistance. In early 1970, I was invited to speak at a massive anti-war demonstration in Washington. 500,000 people gathered on the National Mall, the largest protest in American history. Standing on that stage, looking out at 500,000 people, black and white, young and old, rich and poor, all united in opposition to a war that was tearing our country apart, I understood something profound. My real fight wasn't in any boxing ring. My real opponent wasn't Sonny Liston or Floyd Patterson or any other man with gloves. My real fight was against a system that demanded conformity over conscience, that valued obedience over integrity. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face after my speech. "Ali, do you think you'll ever fight again?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing my words would be broadcast across the country, knowing they'd reach the boxing commissioners and government officials who held my fate in their hands. "I'm fighting," I said. "Every day I speak truth. I'm fighting. Every time I refuse to bow down to injustice, I'm fighting. They can take my title, they can take my license, but they'll never take my soul. I am still the greatest, not because of what I do in the ring, but because I refuse to bow." The crowd roared its approval, but I wasn't performing for them anymore. I was speaking to that young man from Louisville who'd started this journey, reminding him why he'd made the hardest choice of his life. In the distance, I could see the Capitol dome gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in those buildings, men in suits were deciding my future. But standing there on that stage, surrounded by the voices of a movement I'd helped inspire, I realized something they'd never understand. They thought they were punishing Muhammad Ali by taking away his boxing career. Instead, they'd created something far more dangerous. Muhammad Ali, the voice of a generation that refused to be silenced. October 26, 1970. Atlanta, Georgia. 3.5 years after they took everything away from me. Walking through that tunnel toward the ring felt like stepping back into the world of the living. The roar hit me like a physical force. 5,000 people packed into the Atlanta Municipal Auditorium, screaming, cheering, booing, all of them desperate to see if Muhammad Ali could still fight. My hands were shaking as I laced on my gloves. Not from fear. I'd never been afraid of any man born off woman, but from something deeper. This was my resurrection, my chance to prove that 3.5 years of exile hadn't killed the fire inside me. Angelo Dundee noticed my trembling fingers. "You all right, champ?" "I ain't been champ for 3 years," I reminded him. "Tonight we find out if I still got it." The truth was I didn't know. My body felt different, heavier, slower. At 28, I should have been entering my prime. Instead, I was making a comeback from professional death, wondering if the greatest gift God had given me was still there. Jerry Corey stood in the opposite corner, a tough Irish kid from California who'd been winning fights while I was winning court battles. He wasn't the most skilled opponent, but he was hungry, young, unbroken by 3 years of forced retirement. When the bell rang for round one, I moved forward and threw the first jab of my comeback. It felt foreign, like picking up a musical instrument after years of silence. My timing was off. My legs felt heavy, but I was back. By the third round, something magical happened. The old rhythm started returning. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The combinations flowed again. My feet found their dance, and Jerry Corey started bleeding from cuts above both eyes. The referee stopped the fight in the third round. TKO for Muhammad Ali. But as I raised my arms in victory, I knew something had changed forever. I was no longer the untouchable young lion who destroyed Sonny Liston. I was something different now, scarred, tested, but still dangerous. The real battle wasn't happening in boxing rings, though. It was happening in marble chambers in Washington, D.C. For 4 years, my legal team had fought my draft conviction through every level of the American court system. Lower courts had upheld my conviction. Appeals courts had affirmed it. But now, finally, the Supreme Court of the United States was going to decide whether Muhammad Ali was a criminal or a man of conscience. June 28, 1971. I was training for my next fight when my lawyer called with news that would change everything. "Muhammad," he said, his voice barely containing his excitement, "the Supreme Court just ruled 8-0 in your favor. Your conviction has been overturned." I sat down hard on my training table. 8-0. The highest court in the land had declared that Muhammad Ali was right, and the government that had tried to destroy me was wrong. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means you're free. It means you were right all along. It means the system that tried to silence you just admitted defeat." But even as the legal victory vindicated my stand, an even bigger fight was looming. Joe Frazier had claimed the heavyweight title while I was in exile. He was undefeated, devastating, and backed by every boxing establishment figure who tried to erase Muhammad Ali from history. The press called it the fight of the century. Madison Square Garden, March 8, 1971. But it was more than two heavyweights settling a score. It was America's divided soul stepping into the ring. In one corner stood Joe Frazier, the establishment's champion, the government's choice, the man who'd never questioned authority or challenged the system. A great fighter who'd played by all the rules. In the other corner stood me, the rebel, the draft dodger, the man who'd sacrificed everything for principle. The fighter who dared to say no to the most powerful government on earth. For 15 rounds, we went to war. Frazier came at me like a wrecking ball, his left hook crashing into my body, my head, wherever he could land it. This wasn't the artistic boxing I'd grown up loving. This was violence, pure and simple. Two men trying to destroy each other in front of 20,000 screaming witnesses. By the middle rounds, both of us were bleeding. My jaw ached from his hooks. His face was swelling from me jabs. Neither of us would back down. Neither of us would break. In the 11th round, Frazier caught me with a left hook that rattled my teeth. In the 15th, head dropped me with another one. The first time I'd been knocked down in my professional career. I got UPAT at the count of 4, but I was hurt. When the final bell rang, both of us were barely standing. Frazier's eyes were swollen shut. My face looked like I'd been in a car wreck. We'd given everything we had, left pieces of ourselves on that canvas. The decision went to Joe Frazier. Unanimous. I sat in my corner, my face swollen beyond recognition, my body screaming in pain. Around me, the crowd was going wild, some celebrating Frazier's victory, others mourning my defeat. But inside, I felt something unexpected. Not defeat, not shame, something else entirely. I had walked back into the storm after 3.5 years of exile. I had faced the establishment chosen champion and nearly beaten him. I had proven that Muhammad Ali, the man who'd sacrificed everything for his principles, was still standing. They had tried to break me with exile. They had tried to bankrupt me with lawsuits. They had tried to imprison me with threats. They had tried to erase me from history by stripping away my title and Millivellihood. But here I was, bloodied and beaten, yet somehow more powerful than I'd ever been. The reporters pushed their microphones toward my battered face. "Ali, how do you feel about losing?" I looked directly into the cameras. knowing my words would reach millions of Americans who'd watch this fight as more than just a boxing match. I lost a fight tonight, I said through swollen lips. But I didn't lose my dignity. I didn't lose my principles, and I ain't bowing to nobody. That night, I lost a fight, but I'd already won my place in history. 3 years after losing to Joe Frazier, I stood in a steaming jungle in Zaire, preparing to do something everyone said was impossible. George Foreman was supposed to destroy me. At 25, he was younger, stronger, and had demolished both Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, men who'd beaten me. The experts called him unbeatable. Vegas installed him as a 4-1 favorite. But something had changed in me since that night at Madison Square Garden. The loss to Frazier had taught me something more valuable than any victory. I could be beaten in the ring and still remain unbroken as a man. October 30th, 1974. Kinshasa, Zaire. The rumble in the jungle. At 4:30 in the morning, under a full African moon, I entered that ring not just to reclaim a championship, but to complete a journey that had started 7 years earlier in a Houston induction center. For 8 rounds, I let George Foreman punch himself into exhaustion against my arms, my shoulders, my body. The crowd thought I was getting beaten. My corner worried I was taking too much punishment. Booty knew something they didn't. I knew how to endure. In the 8th round, when Foreman's arms were heavy and his breathing labored, I unleashed combinations he never saw coming. A straight right hand sent the most feared heavyweight in the world crashing to the canvas. Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali! 60,000 Africans chanted as I raised my arms in triumph. But this wasn't just about boxing anymore. This was about something bigger. The man who'd been brandied a traitor in America was now being celebrated as a hero in the heart of Africa. I was heavyweight champion of the world again. But more than that, I was proof that a man could lose everything, sacrifice everything, and still find his way back to greatness without compromising his soul. The years that followed brought more fights, more victories, more defeats. I beat Frazier twice in rematches. I lost to Leon Spinks and beat him back. I tried comeback after comeback, sometimes holding on to glory too long, the way all fighters do. But boxing was just part of my story now. The platform I'd built through my struggles became something bigger than any championship belt. I traveled the world as more than an athlete. In Africa, they called me a hero before they knew my boxing record. In Muslim countries, I was welcomed as a brother in faith. In America, the man who'd once been called a traitor was slowly being recognized as something else entirely. A patriot who'd loved his country enough to challenge it when it was wrong. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter asked me to travel to Africa on a diplomatic mission. The same government that had tried to imprison me now wanted me to represent America abroad. I declined. I was still my own man, but the request itself spoke to how much had changed. I started speaking at universities again, but now the students weren't coming to see a controversial figure. They were coming to hear from a man who'd proven that standing up for your principles, even when it cost you everything, was the only way to live. What I want young people to understand, I would tell them, is that your life is not measured by how many times you get knocked down, but by how many times you get back up. And most important, whether you stayed true to yourself while you were down there. As the 1980s progressed, my body began betraying me in ways that no opponent ever had. My speech slowed. My hands trembled. The diagnosis came like a punch I never saw coming. Parkinson's disease. The same hands that had moved like lightning in the ring now shook when I tried to sign autographs. But even as my body failed, something else was happening. The man who'd once been the most polarizing figure in America was becoming something unprecedented, a universally beloved symbol of courage and integrity. In 1996, I received a phone call that would give me the chance to complete the circle that had begun 29 years earlier. "Muhammad," the voice said, "we want you to light the Olympic torch in Atlanta." The Olympic torch, the most watched moment in sports, broadcast to billions of people around the world. Me, the man who'd once refused to serve his country, being asked to represent the very best of American ideals. July 19th, 1996. Centennial Olympic Stadium in Atlanta. 87,000 people in the arena, 3 billion watching worldwide. I climbed those steps slowly, my body betraying every movement, the torch shaking in my trembling hands. But with each step, I felt the weight of the journey I traveled. From Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. From champion to exile to champion again. From traitor to hero to something beyond both. When I reached the cauldron and lifted that torch, the entire world held its breath. My hand trembled violently from the Parkinson's, but I steadied myself with something stronger than muscle, the same willpower that had carried me through the darkest years of my exile. The flame caught. The cauldron blazed to life, and 87,000 people rose to their feet in a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. In that moment, I understood something profound. The same country that had once tried to break me for refusing to step forward was now celebrating me for taking the most important step of all, the step toward lighting the hopes and dreams of the entire world. The trembling in my hands wasn't weakness. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime spent fighting, not just in boxing rings, but for principles, for justice, for the right to live as my conscience demanded. Standing there with that torch, I thought about that young man in the Houston Induction Center who'd made the hardest decision of his life. I thought about the exile years, the hate mail, the nights wondering if I'd thrown away everything for nothing. But I also thought about the young people who'd found courage in my example. The millions around the world who'd learned that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to do what your government demands. The flame burned bright above Atlanta that night, but it was nothing compared to the fire that had burned inside me for 29 years. The fire of a man who discovered that staying true to yourself is worth any sacrifice. After the ceremony, reporters asked me how it felt to be so universally loved after being so universally hated. I thought about that question for a long moment. Then I smiled, despite the difficulty speaking brought now. "I'm the same man I always was," I said slowly. "I just waited for the world to catch up." In the end, Muhammad Ali's greatest victory was not the fights he won in the ring, but the fight he never stopped waging, the fight to remain himself. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.